Welcome to Veteran Resource Podcast, where you will meet nonprofit organizations focused on improving the lives of veterans and their family members. Here is your host, Jeremy Paris.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 110 of the Veteran Resource Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Paris. On today's episode, we are talking to Doug McCormick. Doug is the managing partner and co-founder of HCI Equity Partners. Mr. McCormick has been an active investor in numerous markets to include aerospace, defense, distribution, food services, packaging, manufacturing, and outsourced business services. He currently serves as chairman of the board for AmercareRoyal and Summit Interconnect and as a board member of Naumann, Hobbs Material Handling, Inc. and Quadel Consulting Corporation. Before founding HCI Equity, Mr. McCormick worked at Thayer Hidden Creek, Thayer Capital, and the investment banking division of Morgan Stanley and Company. He also served as a captain in the U.S. Army's 25th Infantry Division. As author of Family Inc., Mr. McCormick is committed to empowering others through financial literacy with a focus on the veteran community. His writing on financial literacy and veteran economics empowerment have been covered by leading media outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, USA Today, PBS, Time, Fast Company, and the Motley Fool. Mr. McCormick serves as the chairman of the board for Bunker Labs and a member of the board of directors for Team Red, White, and Blue. He is a 2011 Henry Crown Fellow and a founding member of Capital for Children. Mr. McCormick received his Master of Business Administration from Harvard Business School and his Bachelor of Science in Economics from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. This is a really cool episode. I know you're going to enjoy it, so let's jump right into the interview. Doug, welcome to the Veteran Resource Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Absolutely. I think that what it is that you're doing is super important, especially in the military and veteran community. So I'm very thankful that you were able to come on the podcast and share your knowledge with us.
Well, it's a partnership. I think I've got some good concepts to share, but I need partners like you to get the word out, so this is perfect.
Excellent. Well, Doug, let's start off with your background. What can you tell me about yourself?
Sure. I think the thing I would, the high level picture I would share with you as we talk about financial literacy is that a lot of the things that I am recommending and that I'm offering in the content that I put together is really a byproduct of my own personal life experiences. And so just to back up very quickly, I'm a 1991 West Point grad, so I'm an old timer compared to many of the veterans out there today. And my experience was very different than a lot of the recent veterans as well. So early 90s, there was not a lot going on after Iraq won. And so I had a pretty benign experience. It was a very good experience for me. I served in Fort Benning and Schofield Barracks. But after my tour of duty concluded that it was not going to be a career choice for me. And candidly, that was probably a little bit of kind of immaturity and lack of perspective. I was convinced that the peace dividend was alive and well, and we weren't going to need the kind of capabilities we'd invested in previously. And so I went through a career transition after getting out of service, and I went back to business school. I did a 2-year program studying finance and business at Harvard, and then have been essentially in the money management business for the last several decades. From business school, I spent some time in Manhattan on Wall Street working for Morgan Stanley, and for about the last 20 years have been a professional investor. And so I manage money on behalf of institutions, organizations like pension funds and insurance companies, and it's a very long-term perspective. And what I learned in my day job is that many of the principles that we used to manage risk and manage money applied to my own personal financial decisions and choices. And so, about a year ago, I published a book called Family Inc., Using Business Principles to Maximize Your Family's Wealth. And, my complaint about the overall material or landscape for financial literacy works is that there are very few things that are accessible by Main Street America and also rigorous and able to be adapted to real life circumstances. And so what I've tried to do is give people very practical tools but those tools are based on, very good intellectual rigor, and I think withstand the test of time. And so today I'm here talking to you, but one of my passions is kind of getting the word out about the right way to think about economic empowerment and financial literacy. That is a topic that is tremendously important, not only for all Americans. I think it's a real crisis in America today, but our military community in particular has challenges with some of these choices and circumstances. And so I'm really trying to bring that message to the veteran community.
I, too, am one of the old-timey veterans, as you put it. I went in 1990. I was 17 right out of high school, and I went in 1990 and stayed until 2000. And it was a similar experience. For me, it was, we're in peacetime. There's nothing major that's happening. I never got deployed anywhere, and then I get out, and a year later, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. It's the classic luck of the draw, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I have been. It's kind of because of the book, but just also because of personal interest. I've been spending time with a couple veteran service organizations. Team RWB is one, and Bunker Labs is the other. And, I definitely feel like one of the old men in the room when I get around those guys. So I think it's good for me, though. I'm trying to stay young.
Absolutely. Yeah. They've got a lot of information to give, and a lot of information that you can give to them as well. So that's great.
And they're a great group of folks.
So let's define the problem here. America sucks at financial literacy.
You are right. And I'm, I think it's certainly fair to be critical of individual choices, but I also think we're in an interesting situation where the techniques that my father or someone's grandfather used 50 years ago, which is get a job, work hard, stay with the same company, retire when you're 65, and save 10% along the way. Those basic tools don't work in today's economy. There's a lot of things that are going on to change that. And so I think it's really two things. I think we suck at it in general. And then on top of that, I think the game has gotten more complicated and harder. And so the rules of the game have changed.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. You used to stick with a company, like you said, forever. My grandfather retired from the steel plant. And nowadays, you can't expect that company. It could be a huge company, and you can't expect it to be around in 10 years.
Yeah. Just to give you a couple stats that are just shocking to me, your father or grandfather likely had 2 to 3 employers in a lifetime. Today's millennials will likely have between 10 and 13. Your father or grandfather's generation probably retired at 65-ish, and at the time of retirement likely had a 4-year life expectancy and likely had some kind of defined pension benefit. Today's retiree retires at 65, and the life expectancy at time of retirement is about 16 years. And those pension benefits have changed dramatically, and in many cases gone away. And I would throw Social Security in there. While it's not gone away or changed dramatically, arguably in its status quo, the funding legitimacy of that is certainly in question.
Absolutely. Military members, they definitely have, I would say, the basics of financial literacy at best. I mean, me, when I was 17 years old, going in the military, I was fortunate that at the time when I was living with my grandparents, I think, or maybe when I was living with my mom, I got a bank account. I was taught from that point on, here's how when you spend money, you write it out in the register, and here's how to manage, all of your money. That was the bare basics. And going into the military at 17, I didn't know more than that. Like, I knew how to balance my checkbook, but as far as anything, saving or credit cards, at 17, I had 2 credit cards, a Visa and a MasterCard. They got maxed out within a week of getting them.
Hey, but it was a great week.
Yeah.
It was a great week.
I'm from Buffalo, and went over the border into Toronto with a bunch of my buddies, and I was the only one out of all of my friends who had a credit card. It was like, oh my God, we could put it on the card. Hey, put it on the card. And then the waitress came over. We went to the Hard Rock Cafe, and the waitress came over after a couple hours of drinking and said, There's nothing left on this. This is maxed out. And I was like, how does that happen? Is that, can that happen? I
You
thought we just keep buying. But
you were popular though for a
yeah,
time, right?
for a day, I was way
Yeah.
popular. Yeah, so I think that a lot of people in the military, they go in, up until then, you've had your parents taking care of you.
Yep. Yep.
And now all of your financial decisions, especially military is known for getting married young. So now you've got a family that you're trying to take care of as well. How can military members be doing better with their finances?
Yeah, your story brings out so many, kind of interesting points. I think let me take a couple of them in terms of observations that I see in terms of how the community thinks about this topic. The first is, I think our definition of success is often too low. And I know when I was thinking about financial literacy for my soldiers. The basic test was if you weren't getting a late notice from your landlord and you were satisfying all your debt payments, then everybody considered you to be kind of okay, if you will. And I think many of the courses that we taught back when I was active, they kind of taught to the least common denominator. And so to your point, very basic things like managing a checking account, avoiding payday loans. And those are certainly important, but if you get back to the comment I made earlier about the game has changed, the bar's gotten higher, I don't think our curriculum has evolved in a way that's changed with the times. And I think the other thing I would say about my service experience is I think when it comes to financial literacy, in many cases, we teach people how to play defense, not how to play offense. And what I mean by that is, we teach them how to stay out of trouble financially. We don't teach people how to use their resources to really create wealth. And so I think that's a big name of the game. And the other two things I would say about this topic as it pertains to our veteran community is, one, veterans need to acknowledge that in many cases they have less developed skills in these areas, not because they're not smart enough to get it or they haven't had the right education, but because the environment that they've been in has purposely been simplified or protective, if you will. And what I mean by that is, if you're in service, you have life insurance, you probably have health insurance, you certainly have health insurance, you probably have life insurance, you probably buy food on a commissary, and you've been told to stay away from things like payday loans. And so now you get out of service and you've got to get your own health care. You're not buying at the commissary anymore. Your taxes just got a lot more complicated. And so I think it's acknowledging that when you get out of service, you're going to have to learn about some of these skills in a way you didn't before. And then the last thing I think many of us do incorrectly is we assume that the financial advice that all Americans get is appropriate for us. And I don't think that acknowledges the many differences in the veteran community. So, there's a lot of them, but let me just tick down through a couple. 83% of veterans will make a mid-career transition, and that transition has its own unique challenges to kind of economics. You mentioned veteran families are more likely to have started a family, have dependents. In many cases, I think veterans don't have the same quality network when they go to transition because they've been moving from post to post, every 36 months. So those are real differences that can make transition challenging. I think on the positive side, veterans have things like the GI Bill that they may have access to, and they certainly have some very good skills, teamwork and things they learned in service. And so it's learning how to make the most of the differences that are positive and overcome some of those negatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned, I was digging through your site, you mentioned that each family should have a CFO. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the basic concept of my book, back to the genesis, was that as I was in business, I was seeing a lot of the things that we were doing to manage the financial affairs of the businesses I worked with. And I tried to, basically apply those to my personal situation. And so the analogy is that, a business has a chief financial officer, someone that is looking out over all of the assets that company owns. And a family needs that same person. And I find many of us, we focus on what's timely, not what's important. And so, if you're not careful, you're working hard, you're paying the monthly bills, you're kind of keeping your head above water, and you wake up and, you're getting ready to retire and you haven't made some of the long-term strategic decisions to set yourself up well for retirement, to make sure your kids have learned these valuable skills. And so the concept is every family needs a chief financial officer to look out over all of the big financial choices that a family will make in a lifetime.
Great advice. Great advice. I know that for many years, I got caught up in surviving. So the money comes in, you pay you put out the closest fires, you pay the bills that need to be paid, and it gets you through the month. And then the money comes in next month, then you do the same thing.
Yeah, no, I've been there, and that is a challenging game. One of the things that I often say to folks is, it's much easier to grow your way to wealth than it is to save your way to wealth. And what I mean by that is, when you grow your way to wealth, you focus on investing in yourself through education or managing your career or maybe even entrepreneurship, because for most of us, especially veterans getting out of service, the largest asset we have is our labor, and how we sell that labor into the market really is going to dramatically influence how financially secure we are. And then I think the other half of the equation is, once you get a little money saved, are you thoughtful about how to invest that such that that can grow for you, as opposed to just saving your way to security?
That's a great way to look at it. Education is always going to pay dividends over time.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion today about, is education still a good investment? And I think, averages are deceiving. And so when you look at things on average, there's lots of discussion about, the cost of college has gone way up over time. But I think for the right individual, in spite of the fact that the cost of education has gone up, if you choose good majors that have demand in the marketplace, education today is still by far and away one of the very best investments that you can make.
Yeah, and that doesn't necessarily need to translate into a degree. Just constantly learning. There's seminars, there's books, there's tons of nonprofit organizations that give you, like Bunker Labs and Patriot Boot Camp and different things like that, where you can learn how to get ahead and be worth more than just working with your back.
Yeah, I totally believe that one of the things that's happened in the economy today is employers are more focused on skills and experiences than they are degrees. And so I think the concept of certainly going back for traditional education can be a very good investment, but also proactively spending money on your network and your career development and acquiring new skills is equally important. And I think one of the things, as an economy is very dynamic like ours, and you see all kinds of technology innovation, it's easy to get stale. And so I think the need for people to kind of tune up their skills, if you will, and take online courses or go to a networking session, all those are really valuable to make sure that you've got, a brand and skills that are very, kind of saleable in today's market.
Right. Absolutely. So what are some of the key practices that vets could be doing to help with their finances?
So I got a couple there. I would say they're high level topics, and then we can kind of go into more detail. But I think one of the key things that I encourage vets to think about is, the day you get into service, you need to start planning for exiting service. And not to say that that means you're going to get out, but I think you've got to create the financial flexibility to do so. And statistically speaking, most vets will, right? 83% of veterans get out before their 20-year mark, and so they make that mid-career transition. And, I think a lot of people, they talk to young folks and they talk about saving for retirement. My experience has been, talking to a 20-something about saving money that's going to be spent when they're 70 doesn't resonate.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, actually, I don't think that's what the real the savings are for. I think young people in service need to save so that when they transition, they can afford to go back to college. They can afford to start a business if they want to. They can afford to move to a geography that offers better professional opportunity. So I think that the number one goal for people in service is to maximize their financial flexibility. And so I just talked about a bunch of things you could do to maximize your financial flexibility. That also implies there are things that you could avoid to maximize financial flexibility. Things like starting a family early. That's a real financial commitment that I think inhibits people from good transition sometime. So I think that's one example of the kind of things people should think about. I think many veterans get out and they don't appreciate what a unique set of experiences and skills they have. And so I also talk to people about making sure they appreciate the real assets of being a veteran. That includes the GI Bill. It includes all the transition benefits, but it also includes the brand and the skills that you've created. I think when you come out of service, people expect that you can lead, you can communicate, you're disciplined, you're a good team player. And, my experience has been those kind of skills are way more important than, technical skills, which for the most part, we can all learn over time.
Right.
The other thing, back to this concept that wealth is really driven by the quality of your career and the quality of your ability to earn an income. I think veterans need to specifically acknowledge that managing a career in service is different than a civilian career. And candidly, I'm not sure we all do that well. For example, I think vets are humble and team oriented to a fault. And in many cases, in a civilian environment, people need to be advocating for themselves. They need to be able to effectively articulate how they can contribute and what their value proposition is for the employer. And so I think, proactively thinking about how to manage a career differently outside of service is another important aspect of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the things that it's ingrained in you when you're in the military, that when something good happens, you didn't do it. Your team did it. It's a team effort. You very rarely will hear somebody in the military talking about and praising themselves for something that just got accomplished. It's more a we thing. And when you get out of the military, especially if you're going to look for a job or something like that, and everything that you're talking about is what the team did and what we did, then they're thinking that, okay, well, you're just a piece of this team. You really probably didn't have a major impact on all of those things that happened, but it's just a vocabulary that you have to get used to.
Totally agree. And I think that vocabulary translates into other areas too. There's just a language of business that most of us don't have exposure to unless we've gone back to school or been in the civilian career for a period of time. And so, it's not hard to learn, but just acknowledging that you don't have that perspective and proactively making the time to do so. Jeremy, one of the other key pieces of advice I have for folks in transition is to think like an entrepreneur. And, my basic pitch is we're all entrepreneurs regardless of what we do. So even in service, you're in the job of selling your labor, and your customer may be the United States government, or it may be, IBM if you're in the civilian sector, or if you're an entrepreneur, your customer is whoever wants to hire you for your services or your product. And I think when you think about that, entrepreneurship is simply combining labor with a little bit of money to create a business. And I think that's the financial game of life. And so when you think about it that way, I think it allows people to see the benefits of investing in themselves, managing a career to develop a brand, and, putting away capital so that they can afford to take a little bit of risk on those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about for the veterans or the military members who are already in crisis mode? How do they get back to good?
I tell you, unfortunately, there's no great intellectual answer to this question. And what I mean by that is the solution is not intellectually hard, but it can be personally hard. And it's continue to focus on making good choices about your career so you have a continual income, and then you've got to figure out how to cut costs, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, over time, the great news about this financial game of life is over time, you can generally solve it by working longer and saving more. But I find that when people get themselves in financial trouble, it takes a while to get out of. And the one caveat to being able to overcome some of those challenges is the negative implications of having to declare bankruptcy. So I talk about us all being entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs have brands. It's really challenging to overcome the negative impacts of having to declare bankruptcy. It has a brand implication in terms of how you get a job, how people view your ability to manage with financial discipline, and it also really wrecks your credit history and makes it hard for you to get future loans to buy a house or a car or the things you may need to support your family. And so my general advice when I see people in financial challenges is, you got to right size the budget relative to your earnings, continue to focus on growing your earnings, And if there's any way possible to avoid having to declare some kind of bankruptcy, you got to do that, because the branding and financial consequences of that are usually very high.
Yeah. I recall having conversations with people exactly about this, where they were like, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I said, well, how much are you making? Like, let's compare how much money is coming in with how much money is going out. And just starting that, like, that wasn't even something that was being done. So just starting there and writing it all down and saying, wow, I've got 2,000 coming in, but I've got 2,500 going out every month. So every single month, you're either not paying one bill in order to pay another bill, or you're pulling more debt from a credit card or some other source until that's gone. And you can only do that for so long before you either, there's only two ways out of that in my mind, is you have to make more money or you have to spend less money. It's only math.
Yep. And none of those answers are intellectually hard, but in actually getting it done, earning more money or figuring out how to save less, that can be hard.
Yeah.
I do find there are a couple other things that may be helpful ways to think about this problem. The first is, if you find yourself in financial distress, over communicate about it to the people involved. And so there are certainly lots of programs on base and for active duty service members to help think through this and provide temporary loans and things like that. But also, if you are going to be late on a payment to a landlord or a car payment, not that it relieves you of your responsibility or you're still not going to get a late fee, but I think the other person on the other end of that transaction feels better if they know ahead of time that you may miss a payment. And the other thing that I think is an interesting way to think about this problem is, I often tell people I care less about what you spend it on and more about what the nature of that expense is in terms of how quickly you can get rid of it. So I'll give you an example. If I said to young people, what is a better use of your money, buying a car, which has a $350 payment per month, or going out to the bar every month and spending $350? Most people would say, well, the responsible thing is the car. And I would say, I don't really look at it quite that way, because, a car payment is something fixed. You can't get rid of it quickly. And, in many cases, it comes with ancillary costs like maintenance and gas and insurance. And so I recommend folks look at what costs am I making that are fixed that I can't get rid of, and what costs are variable that I can adjust quickly. And if you can keep most of your costs as variable, when you do enter a period of lower earnings or an unexpected cost, you can quickly adjust the rest of your expenditures.
That's good advice. So for the person that's listening to this and they've just now, from this interview, heard about Family Inc., the book that you put out, what can you tell them about what they can get if they pick up Family Inc.? What is the book all about?
First of all, I think they can expect to get something that is conversational in form. So like you and I talking, but pretty rigorous in terms of, no matter how financially sophisticated you are, this should give you the tools to satisfy your financial planning needs. And the thing that I think is really powerful about it is, back to the earlier part of our conversation when I said every family needs a chief financial officer. My own personal experience has been that I struggled how to connect different financial decisions. So, in a vacuum, we can talk about education being good. We can talk about investing as an important part of financial security. But when you have competing demands about, should I go back to school and spend money on that? Should I invest? Should I buy insurance? Should I buy a house? What kind of career should I choose? I find that all those individual rules are hard. And so what I try to provide people in Family Inc. is a framework to think about all of those major life decisions. And the answers may be different for different people, but it will help you figure out what your unique circumstances are. And then based on that, how you balance competing demands. So competing demands for earning an income today versus investing in yourself for the future, competing demands between consumption for today and saving for tomorrow, competing demands like trying to get returns on your investment versus the ups and downs of the market. And so I think it's very practical, and for people that are willing to invest a little time, can really change your trajectory to financial security.
Very cool. How can people pick up this book?
So it's available on Amazon, certainly at Barnes & Noble as well. I have a website. It's familyinc.com. And there you can read more about the book. And it's also got some financial tools and calculators to help you do some pretty cool things. The other thing I would say is in terms of supporting the veteran community, what I've found is that many organizations like Student Veterans of America, the Tillman Foundation, the PenFed Foundation, Bunker Labs are acknowledging that as part of their broad program, financial literacy is an important aspect of that. And so I've been donating books to those kind of organizations. In some cases, they've been using content in curriculum like the Boots to Business program at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families. And so you may see it as part of a broader program. And I think that's probably the most effective way to get this information is often through something that is an existing veteran service organization.
That's a great idea. You've got the peer aspect wrapped around not just reading the book, but being able to interact.
Yeah, I think so much of this, it's helpful to have somebody that's going through it with you and live in those same challenges and choices and questions and have a place to bounce ideas off.
So, Doug, one last thing before we sign off. Can you give me a last piece of advice for veterans out there or military members about their finances?
So if you haven't figured out, I sure do have lots of advice. So I'm going to have a hard time making it just one. But I would say when you get out, focus on flexibility first, financial flexibility to find the right career, the career that's going to create the most financial security for the family. And then the second thing I would tell people is appreciate your time horizon. And what I mean by that is many people, they get out and they think about how do I maximize my salary this year or next year? And the reality is for most of us, when we get out, you probably have another 30 years of career left. And so don't make choices to maximize this year's income. Make choices to maximize the total income over the next 30 years. If you think that way, you'll likely make very different decisions.
Awesome advice. Awesome advice. And it's advice that I wish I would have had back when I got out in 2000. I think I would be in a different place.
Honestly, Jeremy, the reason that I felt so compelled to write the book is, at call it mid-40s, I really thought I would have benefited had someone sat me down and explained some of these things to me, 15, 20 years ago.
So one more time, what is the best way for the listeners to get in contact with you?
Just go to the website, familyinc.com. That's FAMILYINC.com. There's a place to contact the author. You can order the book there. And thanks very much for helping me get the word out.
Absolutely. And that's a great URL. I'm surprised you got that one.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Great. Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Veteran Resource Podcast. As always, you can go and check out the show notes at veteranresourcepodcast.com/110, and you can get all of the information about the book and about Doug. If you hadn't had a chance yet, go and check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/Jeremy Paris, and you can see what rewards you can get for helping out the podcast. That is all I have for you this week. I will see you next week for episode 111.